I was 6 years old when my parents brought home my baby sister Abigail, and everything in my life changed. My name is Noreen. I am 32 years old, and I grew up as the forgotten child in my family, while my sister was treated like royalty. For most of my life, I accepted this as normal until my husband Derek and his older brother Jackson came into my life. What happened at my parents' anniversary dinner last year still feels surreal sometimes. Jackson finally said what no one else would dare to say, and watching him confront my parents about their lifetime of favoritism was both terrifying and the most liberating moment of my adult life. Before I share what happened, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you've ever witnessed family favoritism, hit that like and subscribe button so we can talk about it. Growing up in suburban Boston with my parents, Gloria and Richard, should have been the typical American childhood dream. We had a nice 4-bedroom house with a backyard, good schools, and my parents both had stable jobs. Until I was 6, I remember being the center of my parents' world. There were family photos of me everywhere, stories about my first words, and albums full of my baby pictures. All of that changed when Abigail arrived. I still remember the day they brought her home. My mom's friend Anne was watching me, and when my parents walked in with this tiny bundle wrapped in a pink blanket, they barely acknowledged I was there. "Come meet your sister," my dad said as an afterthought while my mom cooed over Abigail. That was the beginning of a pattern that would define our family dynamics for decades. As Abigail grew, the differences in how we were treated became impossible to ignore. My birthday parties were simple affairs with a few friends and a homemade cake. Abigail's birthdays were elaborate productions with bouncy castles, professional entertainers, and custom cakes that must have cost hundreds of dollars. One year, my parents actually forgot my birthday entirely until 3 days after when my grandmother called to wish me happy birthday. My mom hastily picked up a cake from the grocery store and tried to act like they had planned it all along. Christmas was another glaring example of the disparity. I would receive practical gifts like clothing and school supplies, while Abigail would get mountains of toys, electronics, and whatever trendy items she had requested. When I was 14, I received a scientific calculator for high school math classes and some socks. Abigail, then 8, received a new gaming system, a designer coat, and a mountain of toys that took over the living room. The favoritism extended to school support as well. My parents never missed a single one of Abigail's dance recitals or school events. She was enrolled in expensive private dance lessons from age 4, along with piano lessons, swimming classes, and any other activity that caught her interest, even if she abandoned it after a few weeks. Meanwhile, I was told to take the bus to my academic competitions. When I won the regional science fair in 10th grade, neither of my parents attended because Abigail had a minor role in a school play the same evening. By my teenage years, I had learned to be self-reliant. I got a job at 15, working at a local bookstore after school and on weekends. I saved every penny I could, knowing that I would need to fund my own college education, despite my parents' vague promises that they would help. I watched as they started a college fund for Abigail when she was still in elementary school, while telling me that money was too tight for both of us to have savings accounts. The constant message that I was less important, less worthy of love and support, took its toll. I developed anxiety and struggled with feelings of inadequacy that no amount of academic success could overcome. I would lie awake at night wondering what was wrong with me, what I could possibly do to earn the same love my sister received effortlessly. In public, we maintained the facade of a happy family, but at home the truth was impossible to ignore. College was my escape. I was accepted to the University of Massachusetts with a partial academic scholarship. My parents contributed nothing despite their comfortable income, claiming they needed to save for Abigail's future. I took out student loans and worked 20 hours a week in the campus library and another 15 at a coffee shop to cover my expenses. Despite the financial strain, being away from home was liberating. For the first time, I could breathe without the constant reminder that I was the less favored child. It was during my senior year at that coffee shop that I met Derek. He was a business major like me, with kind eyes and a quiet confidence that immediately drew me to him. He started coming in regularly, always ordering the same thing, a large black coffee with a splash of cream, and staying for hours to study. Eventually, he asked me out, and despite my hesitation, I said yes. Dating Derek was a revelation. He listened when I spoke, valued my opinions, and treated me with a respect I had never experienced in my own family. When I finally shared stories about my childhood, he was outraged on my behalf. "That is not normal, Noreen," he insisted. "Parents should never play favorites like that." After graduation, as our relationship grew more serious, I met Derek's family. Unlike my parents, they welcomed me with genuine warmth. His mother, Anne, made a point of getting to know me, asking about my interests and career aspirations. His father, Robert, a retired high school teacher, engaged me in conversations about books and politics, treating my opinions with respect. Then there was Jackson, Derek's older brother by 5 years. A successful corporate attorney with a recent divorce behind him, Jackson had a sharp mind and an even sharper wit. From the moment we met, he took a protective interest in me that I had never experienced before. He questioned me about my career goals and immediately offered to connect me with people in his network who might help. The contrast between Derek's close-knit family and my dysfunctional one was stark. When Derek first met my parents 3 months into our relationship, they spent the entire dinner talking about Abigail's accomplishments at her expensive private college, barely asking Derek a single question about himself. On the drive home, he was uncharacteristically quiet before finally saying, "I see what you mean now. That was uncomfortable." Despite everything, I maintained hope that as Abigail and I moved into adulthood, things might equalize. I could not have been more wrong. If my childhood was defined by emotional neglect, Abigail's was characterized by excessive indulgence. Every whim was catered to, every desire fulfilled, creating a young woman who had never heard the word no and had no concept of financial limitations. While I worked and took out loans for college, my parents paid full tuition for Abigail to attend an exclusive private university where she studied communications with a minor in fashion marketing. Her grades were barely passing, but whenever she struggled, my mother would call her professors to argue about her grades or hire expensive tutors to help her through courses. When Abigail wanted to study abroad in Paris for a semester, my parents didn't hesitate to fund the experience, despite having told me years earlier that international programs were extravagant luxuries. After graduation, my parents bought Abigail a condominium in downtown Boston and a new car as graduation gifts. Meanwhile, I was sharing a small apartment with 2 roommates and driving a used Honda with 200,000 miles on it, still paying off my student loans 5 years after graduation. The most frustrating part was watching Abigail squander these advantages. She bounced from job to job, never lasting more than a few months anywhere. She would quit because the work was too demanding, her boss was too strict, or she simply found the position boring. After each resignation or firing, she would run to our parents, who would console her and assure her it wasn't her fault. "The workplace just doesn't appreciate creative spirits like you," my mother would say, completely ignoring the fact that showing up late and missing deadlines were valid reasons for termination in any industry. As we entered our 20s, Abigail's entitlement only grew worse. She expected our parents to cover her bills when she overspent her generous allowance. She would call them at all hours for emotional support over minor inconveniences. If they didn't answer immediately, she would call repeatedly until they did, regardless of the time or their own commitments. Abigail's love life followed a similar pattern of drama and failure. She dated a series of men who were either wealthy enough to maintain her lifestyle or willing to let her dominate the relationship completely. Whenever a relationship ended, which was inevitably when the man finally tired of her demands, she would launch a campaign of victimhood. Our parents would rally around her, validating her claim that the man was to blame, never suggesting that her behavior might have contributed to the breakup. As my relationship with Derek grew more serious, Abigail's jealousy became increasingly obvious. When we announced our engagement after 3 years of dating, Abigail suddenly had a crisis with her latest boyfriend that required multiple family dinners and lengthy phone calls to resolve. Our engagement dinner was cut short because Abigail called crying about a fight she'd had with her roommate. The wedding planning was a minefield of Abigail's attempts to redirect attention to herself. As my maid of honor, she used every opportunity to make decisions about my wedding that would showcase her own preferences. She tried to change the bridesmaid dresses 3 times because the color I had chosen didn't flatter her complexion. She complained about the menu, the venue, and even the date we had selected because it conflicted with a concert she wanted to attend. On our wedding day, Abigail arrived at the venue an hour late for hair and makeup, sending the entire morning timeline into chaos. During the reception, her toast focused primarily on her own relationship with me as a child, inaccurately portraying herself as my protector and mentor, rather than acknowledging our actual dynamic. She ended up crying dramatically at the reception because a groomsman had politely declined to dance with her. Despite all this, I continued to try to maintain a relationship with my sister. I believed that underneath the entitlement and selfishness, there might be a person worth knowing. We would meet for coffee occasionally, though these meetings invariably turned into sessions where she would complain about her life while showing minimal interest in mine. As Derek and I established our careers and began to achieve financial stability, my parents' expectations took an unexpected turn. Rather than being proud of my success, they began to suggest that I should help out my sister. At first, it was small requests like covering lunch when we went out together or buying her birthday gifts. But over time, the expectations grew. "You know, Noreen, your sister is struggling with her rent this month," my mother would say. "Since you and Derek are doing so well, maybe you could help her out just this once." The just this once quickly became a regular expectation. When we resisted, my parents would imply that I was being selfish and ungenerous. "Family helps family," my father would say sternly, conveniently forgetting how little help I had received from them over the years. The double standard was infuriating. Derek and I had worked hard for everything we had. We lived within our means, saved diligently, and made careful financial decisions. Abigail, meanwhile, spent recklessly on designer clothes, expensive vacations, and impulse purchases, secure in the knowledge that our parents, and now apparently me, would bail her out. What made it worse was that Abigail never showed genuine gratitude for any help she received. She accepted it as her due, as though the world owed her a comfortable life regardless of her choices. The few times I did help her financially at my parents' insistence, she made no effort to repay the loans and actually had the audacity to ask for more money just weeks later. As we approached our 30s, the pattern seemed set in stone. Abigail would remain the eternal child coddled and indulged, while I would be expected to act as a third parent providing financial and emotional support while receiving none in return. Something would have to change, but I had no idea that change would come from such an unexpected source. Jackson Anderson was unlike anyone I had ever met. At 37, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who knew exactly who he was and what he wanted. His divorce 2 years before I met him had left him somewhat cynical about relationships, but fiercely loyal to his younger brother Derek. When Derek first introduced us, Jackson sized me up with an attorney's analytical gaze. "So you're the one who's finally gotten my brother to settle down," he said, extending his hand. "He must think you're pretty special." That first meeting set the tone for our relationship. Jackson was direct, sometimes brutally honest, but never cruel. He asked probing questions about my family, my career, and my goals, genuinely interested in the answers. When I mentioned working through college, he nodded approvingly. "I respect that. Too many people expect everything handed to them these days." The first time Jackson met my family was at a dinner celebrating Derek's and my engagement. I had warned Derek about my parents' behavior, but I hadn't thought to prepare Jackson. Throughout the evening, my parents lavished praise on Abigail's latest endeavor, a social media consulting business that consisted primarily of her posting selfies and receiving free products from companies desperate for exposure. I watched Jackson's expression change from polite interest to confusion to barely concealed irritation as my parents repeatedly interrupted me and redirected conversations to focus on Abigail. When I mentioned my recent promotion at work, my mother nodded distractedly before turning to Abigail and asking about her plans to redecorate her apartment. In the car afterward, Jackson was uncharacteristically quiet. Finally, he looked at Derek and said, "Is it always like that?" Derek nodded grimly. "Every single time." Jackson turned to look at me in the back seat. "And you've put up with this your entire life?" I shrugged, uncomfortable with the direct question. "They're my family. It's just how they are." "That's not family," Jackson said firmly. That's emotional neglect with a side of gaslighting. The holidays that year provided a stark contrast between our two families. Thanksgiving with Derek's parents was warm and inclusive. His mother made a point of asking about my work and genuinely listening to the answer. His father shared family stories that included me as though I were already part of the family. Jackson regaled us with tales of his more interesting cases, carefully anonymized to protect client confidentiality. Christmas with my family, however, was the same as it had always been. Abigail received extravagant gifts, while Derek and I received token presents clearly purchased as an afterthought. My father spent most of the day helping Abigail set up her new laptop, while my mother repeatedly asked when we were planning to have children, then immediately told stories about what a beautiful baby Abigail had been. Throughout the day, I caught Jackson watching these interactions with a frown. Several times he opened his mouth as if to say something, then closed it again after catching Derek's warning glance. Later he told me he had been biting his tongue out of respect for me, but it had been one of the hardest things he'd ever done. As we settled into married life, Jackson became a frequent visitor to our home. He lived just 20 minutes away and would often drop by with takeout and a bottle of wine on Friday evenings. During these casual dinners, our friendship deepened. Jackson offered career advice that proved invaluable, even connecting me with a former colleague who helped me secure a significant promotion. "You're smart, Noreen," he told me after I shared my 5-year career plan with him. "Smarter than most of the people I work with, and they all went to Ivy League schools. Don't ever let anyone make you think otherwise." Coming from someone as accomplished as Jackson, these words meant more than he could know. For the first time in my life, I had someone besides Derek who believed in me unconditionally. The more time we spent together, the more Jackson became the brother I had never had. He was protective without being controlling, supportive without being condescending. He remembered important dates like my birthday and work anniversaries, sending small but thoughtful gifts that showed he was paying attention to my interests. Abigail predictably grew jealous of my relationship with my in-laws, particularly Jackson. When she met him at our wedding, she had immediately tried to charm him with the same flirtatious behavior that usually worked on men. Jackson had been polite but unmoved, which only increased her determination. "Your brother-in-law is so serious," she complained to me later. "Doesn't he know how to have fun?" "He has plenty of fun," I defended. "He just doesn't respond to manipulation." She had huffed at that, clearly offended, but continued to make efforts to engage Jackson whenever they were in the same room. He remained cordial but distant, which infuriated her all the more. As my confidence grew with Jackson's mentorship, I found myself sharing more about my childhood with him. One evening, after a particularly difficult phone call with my mother that left me in tears, I found myself pouring out years of pain. "I don't understand why they've always loved her more." I confessed the words I had never spoken aloud, finally escaping. "What's wrong with me that my own parents can't love me the way they love her?" Jackson's face darkened with anger, but his voice remained gentle. "There is absolutely nothing wrong with you, Noreen. The problem is entirely with them. Some parents create golden children and scapegoats because of their own twisted needs, not because of anything their children did or didn't do." "But why me?" I asked the question that had haunted me since childhood. "Often it's because the scapegoated child reminds the parent of something they dislike about themselves or their past," Jackson explained, "or because the golden child fulfills some fantasy they have about themselves or what their child should be. It's about their dysfunction, not your worth." His words were like a key unlocking a door I hadn't known existed. For the first time, I began to consider that perhaps the lifelong pain wasn't because I was unlovable, but because my parents were incapable of loving both their children equally. Jackson became my staunchest advocate, always ready with advice, or simply a listening ear when family issues arose. Derek appreciated his brother's support, admitting that he sometimes felt helpless in the face of my family's dysfunction. "Jackson has always been the fighter," Derek explained. "When we were kids, he was the one who stood up to bullies not just for me, but for any kid who was being picked on. He hates injustice, and what your parents do to you qualifies as injustice in his book." I was grateful for Jackson's support, but I had no idea just how important his fighting spirit would become until my family's dysfunction reached a breaking point. The situation with Abigail had been deteriorating for months. After her third job loss in 2 years this time from a position our father had secured for her through a golf buddy, she had been unable to make rent on her luxury apartment. Rather than downsize to something within her means, she had simply moved back in with our parents at the age of 26. This arrangement quickly proved challenging for everyone. Abigail treated our parents' home like a hotel, expecting meals prepared and laundry done while contributing nothing to the household. My mother, now in her 60s, was exhausted trying to keep up with Abigail's demands while still working part-time as a high school administrator. The breaking point came during a Sunday dinner at my parents' house, a monthly tradition I maintained out of obligation rather than desire. Derek usually accompanied me, providing moral support and a quick escape if things became too uncomfortable. This particular Sunday, Abigail was in rare form, complaining about how difficult it was to find a job that appreciated her unique talents. "I'm thinking about going back to school," she announced as my mother served dessert. "Maybe a master's degree in media studies or fashion marketing, something that will really showcase my creative abilities." My parents immediately perked up. "That's a wonderful idea, sweetie," my mother gushed. "You've always been so creative." My father nodded enthusiastically. "Education is always a good investment. Where are you thinking of applying?" Abigail listed several prestigious private universities with eye-watering tuition rates, none of which she was likely to be accepted to based on her undergraduate performance. My parents didn't seem concerned about this detail, nodding along as though admission was a foregone conclusion. "Of course I'll need some help with tuition," Abigail added casually, "since I'm not working right now." "We'll figure something out," my father assured her. "Maybe we can use some of our retirement savings." I exchanged a glance with Derek, who looked as concerned as I felt. My parents were in their 60s and not particularly well prepared for retirement. Using those funds for Abigail's third attempt at higher education seemed financially reckless. "Have you considered state schools?" I suggested carefully. "They have excellent programs at a fraction of the cost." Abigail rolled her eyes. "I need a prestigious degree if I'm going to stand out in the industry. No one takes state schools seriously." I bit my tongue, thinking of my own state university degree that had served me perfectly well in building a successful career. "Maybe Noreen and Derek could help," my mother suggested, looking at us with expectant eyes. "You two are doing so well financially. It would be a wonderful way to support your sister." Derek stiffened beside me. I felt the familiar knot of anxiety form in my stomach. "We're saving for our own future, Mom," I said carefully. "We're hoping to buy a house next year, and we're still paying off my student loans." "But family helps family," my father interjected, his tone carrying a hint of reproach. "You and Derek don't have children to support. Abigail is trying to improve her future." "So are we," Derek said firmly. "We've worked hard for everything we have, and we have our own goals." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line while my father's face reddened slightly. Abigail looked between them, sensing the tension, but as usual, only concerned with how it affected her. "I'm not asking for that much," she said, her voice taking on the wheedling quality I knew so well. "Just a little help to get started. I promise I'll pay everyone back once I'm established in my career." The same promise she had made the last 3 times she had borrowed money, none of which had ever been repaid. The drive home after dinner was tense. Derek gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. "I can't believe they expect us to fund her master's degree," he said finally. "After everything we've been through to become financially stable." "They've always been like this," I replied wearily. "Abigail's needs always come first." "But we're adults now. We get to set boundaries. We don't have to say yes." I knew he was right, but the thought of standing up to my parents filled me with dread. My entire life had been structured around avoiding their disapproval, around trying to be good enough to earn the love they lavished so freely on Abigail. "What if they cut us off completely?" I asked, voicing my deepest fear. "What if I lose my family?" Derek reached across the console to take my hand. "Noreen, honey, I need to say something, and I need you to really hear it. The way they treat you isn't love. Love doesn't come with conditions. Love doesn't play favorites. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. I know that rationally, but emotionally, they're still my parents. I've spent my whole life trying to be good enough for them. You are good enough, Derek insisted. You're amazing. You're smart, kind, hardworking, and resilient. If they can't see that it's their loss, not yours. Later that night, alone in our bathroom, I broke down completely. Years of hurt and rejection poured out as I sobbed on the cool tile floor. Derek found me there, gathered me in his arms, and held me until the storm passed. "I think we need some distance from your family," he suggested gently. "Maybe we skip the next few Sunday dinners, give ourselves some space to think." I nodded, too emotionally exhausted to argue. The decision to step back felt both terrifying and liberating. For the first time, I was choosing myself over the desperate need for parental approval that had driven me for so long. Little did I know that our planned distance would be short-lived, as events were already in motion that would force a confrontation none of us were prepared for. My parents' 40th wedding anniversary fell just 2 months after the disastrous Sunday dinner. Despite our decision to create some distance, we couldn't avoid this milestone celebration. My mother had been planning it for months, renting a private room at an upscale restaurant and inviting extended family and close friends. The day before the event, Derek received an unexpected call from Jackson. "I'm coming with you tomorrow," he announced without preamble. Derek put the phone on speaker so I could hear. "To my in-laws' anniversary dinner. Why would you want to do that?" "Because I've been thinking about what you've told me about the latest situation with Abigail and the master's degree funding. It's getting out of hand, and I think you two could use some backup." I felt a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. "Jackson, I appreciate the thought, but it's going to be tense enough without adding another person to the mix." "I'll be on my best behavior," he promised, though something in his tone made me doubt that. "I'll just be there for moral support. Plus, I already RSVP'd to your mother." Derek and I exchanged concerned glances. "You did what?" "I called Gloria yesterday and told her I'd be attending as your guest. She seemed delighted to have another person to show off to." That was probably true. My mother loved nothing more than having an audience for her performances of perfect motherhood. "Jackson, what are you planning?" Derek asked suspiciously. "Nothing specific," his brother replied a bit too innocently. "Just being supportive of my favorite sister-in-law." After hanging up, Derek turned to me with a worried expression. "I know my brother. He's up to something." "Should we be concerned?" Derek considered this. "Jackson has always had a strong sense of justice, sometimes too strong. But he's not reckless. Whatever he's planning, it won't be done without thought." The next evening, we picked up Jackson on the way to the restaurant. He was impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit and blue tie, looking every inch the successful attorney. In the car, he was uncharacteristically quiet, responding to our attempts at conversation with brief answers while checking something on his phone. The private dining room was elegantly decorated with flowers and photos from my parents' 40 years together. I noticed with a familiar pang that most of the recent photos featured Abigail prominently, while I appeared only in group shots or in the background. My parents greeted Derek and me with perfunctory hugs before turning their full attention to Jackson. My mother was especially effusive, clearly impressed by his professional demeanor and obvious success. "We're so glad you could join us, Jackson," she gushed. "It's wonderful to get to know more of Noreen's new family." "I wouldn't have missed it," Jackson replied smoothly. "Family is so important, don't you think?" The early part of the evening proceeded relatively smoothly. Jackson charmed the other guests with witty conversation, while Derek and I did our best to avoid being cornered by relatives asking when we were planning to have children or offering unsolicited career advice. Abigail arrived 30 minutes late, making an entrance in a dress that seemed more appropriate for a nightclub than a family celebration. She air-kissed our parents, barely acknowledged me, and immediately honed in on Jackson, whom she hadn't seen since our wedding. "Jackson, it's been ages!" she exclaimed as though they had once been close. "You look amazing. How have you been?" Jackson maintained his polite smile but kept his responses brief and professional, clearly not encouraging her flirtation. Abigail, unused to being rebuffed, tried harder, laughing too loudly at his mild jokes and finding excuses to touch his arm during conversation. During dinner, my father rose to make a toast to my mother, telling the story of how they met and built a life together. It was a sweet speech, marred only by his pointed comment about watching our two beautiful daughters grow into women, especially our youngest, who has always been the light of our lives. I felt Derek's hand tighten around mine under the table. Jackson's expression remained neutral, but I noticed a slight tightening around his eyes. After the main course was served, Abigail clinked her glass to gain everyone's attention. My stomach dropped, recognizing the gleam in her eye that meant she was about to make everything about herself. "I have an announcement," she declared. "I've been accepted to the Media Studies Master's program at Boston University." My parents immediately burst into effusive congratulations, my mother actually tearing up with pride. The other guests joined in, offering best wishes and questions about the program. "That's wonderful news, darling," my father beamed. "When do you start?" "Next semester," Abigail replied. "I just need to figure out the tuition situation. It's quite expensive, but so worth it for my career." "We'll make it work," my mother assured her with a quick glance in my direction that made her meaning clear. The family would be expected to contribute, with Derek and me specifically targeted for substantial support. I felt the familiar anxiety rising in my chest, the knowledge that I would soon be forced to either comply with their expectations or be labeled the selfish, unsupportive daughter. Derek's jaw was clenched, his frustration evident to anyone who knew him well. "That's an impressive achievement," Jackson spoke up suddenly. "Boston University is selective. Your undergraduate GPA must have been exceptional." There was a brief, uncomfortable silence. Abigail's college performance had been mediocre at best. "Well, I had a very compelling personal statement," Abigail replied vaguely, "and my work experience really stood out." Jackson nodded thoughtfully. "Graduate school is a significant investment. Do you have a financial plan in place?" The directness of the question seemed to startle Abigail. My parents exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with this line of questioning. "We're working on the details," my father interjected smoothly. "As I always say, education is the best investment." "I completely agree," Jackson said, his tone remaining conversational, "especially when it's an investment one makes in oneself." There was something in his emphasis that made me sit up straighter. The tension in the room was suddenly palpable. "What exactly are you suggesting?" my mother asked, her smile fixed but her eyes wary. "I'm just curious about the family's approach to educational investment," Jackson replied, setting down his fork and leaning forward slightly. "Having heard so much about your family dynamics, I find it fascinating." My father frowned. "I'm not sure what Noreen has told you, but we've always supported both our daughters' educational aspirations." "Have you?" Jackson asked, his voice still pleasant but with an underlying steel that I recognized from stories Derek had told about his courtroom demeanor. "Because from what I understand, Noreen worked through college and took out substantial student loans while Abigail had her tuition, housing, and expenses fully covered. That seems like rather different levels of support." The room went silent. My heart hammered in my chest. No one had ever directly challenged my parents about their favoritism before, certainly not in a public setting. "Every family has different circumstances at different times," my mother said after a moment, her voice tight. "When Abigail went to college, we were in a better financial position." Jackson raised an eyebrow. "Were you?" "Because according to public records, your household income has remained relatively stable over the past 20 years with only standard cost of living increases." My father's face darkened. "I don't appreciate the implication or the fact that you've apparently been investigating our finances." "Not investigating," Jackson corrected calmly. "Just observing publicly available information. As an attorney, I'm trained to notice patterns, and the pattern here is quite striking." Abigail, who had been watching this exchange with growing alarm, jumped in. "This is my parents' anniversary celebration. Is this really the time to discuss family finances?" "You're the one who brought up your master's degree funding," Jackson pointed out. "I'm simply following the thread of the conversation." He turned back to my parents, his expression serious. What interests me is not just the financial discrepancy, but the emotional one. I've watched for 3 years now as you consistently prioritize Abigail's needs, wants, and accomplishments over Noreen's. I've seen you interrupt Noreen mid-sentence to praise Abigail for minor achievements. I've observed you dismiss Noreen's significant professional accomplishments while celebrating Abigail's lateral moves between jobs. My mother's face had gone pale while my father's was flushed with anger. The other guests were watching in uncomfortable silence, some pretending sudden interest in their desserts. "I don't think this is an appropriate conversation for this setting," my father said stiffly. "I agree it's uncomfortable," Jackson acknowledged. "But sometimes discomfort is necessary for growth. Let me ask you a direct question. Do you believe you've treated your daughters equally throughout their lives?" My mother's hand trembled as she reached for her water glass. "We love both our daughters," she said, avoiding the question. "That wasn't what I asked," Jackson pressed. "Love can be expressed in many ways, including financial support, emotional attention, and respect for boundaries. Based on those metrics, would you say your treatment has been equal?" "Every child is different," my father deflected. "They have different needs, different personalities." "Different values in your eyes," Jackson suggested. "Different worth." "How dare you?" My mother gasped, her composure finally cracking. "You have no right to come into our celebration and make these accusations." "I'm not making accusations," Jackson replied, his voice still calm. "I'm asking questions about patterns I've observed. Questions that Noreen has been too respectful, too desperate for your approval to ask herself." He turned to look at me directly, his expression softening. "Noreen has worked incredibly hard her entire life, not just professionally, but emotionally. She's maintained a relationship with you despite years of being treated as less important, less worthy of support and attention than her sister. She's excelled in her career without the advantages you freely gave Abigail. And now you're asking her to financially support the sister you've consistently prioritized over her. I'm simply asking if you see the irony in that request." The silence that followed was deafening. I felt as though I couldn't breathe, torn between mortification at having family issues exposed so publicly and a strange sense of validation that someone was finally acknowledging the reality I had lived with for decades. Abigail was the first to react, her face contorting with rage. "This is ridiculous. You're making it sound like they've mistreated Noreen her whole life. She's always been the perfect one, the smart one, making the rest of us feel bad because we can't live up to her standards." Jackson turned his penetrating gaze to her. "Is that how you see it, Abigail? Because from an outside perspective, Noreen has been systematically sidelined while you've received the lion's share of parental resources, attention, and support. You're 26 years old, living with your parents with multiple failed jobs behind you, and now expecting your family to fund another degree you may or may not complete. At what point do you take responsibility for your own life?" Abigail's mouth opened and closed without sound, unused to being spoken to this way. My father finally found his voice. "I think you should leave," he said to Jackson, his tone icy. "You've overstepped every boundary of decency and respect." Jackson nodded as if he had expected this reaction. "I'm happy to leave if that's what you want. But before I do, I'd like to ask Noreen a question." He turned to me, his expression gentle but serious. "Noreen, are you going to continue accepting this treatment? Are you going to keep sacrificing your financial security and emotional well-being to maintain a relationship with people who have consistently shown they value you less than your sister?" All eyes turned to me. For a moment, I couldn't speak, frozen in the spotlight of sudden attention. Derek's hand found mine under the table, a silent show of support. My voice faltered, then strengthened. "I've spent my entire life trying to earn equal love from my parents. Working harder, achieving more, never complaining, always being understanding. And it's never been enough." I looked directly at my parents, seeing the shock on their faces. "I'm not going to fund Abigail's master's degree. I'm not going to continue pretending that the way you treat me is normal or acceptable. I deserve better. I always have." The words once spoken seemed to release something inside me. Years of pent-up hurt and resentment gave way to a strange light feeling. For the first time in my life, I had stood up for myself against my parents. My mother's face crumpled. Noreen, how can you say such things? We've always loved you. Maybe you have, I acknowledged. But not equally, not in a way I could feel or depend on. My father turned to Derek, clearly hoping to find an ally, or at least a moderating influence. Derek, surely you don't support this attack on our family. Derek straightened in his chair. Actually, I do. I've watched for years as you've dismissed my wife's feelings and achievements while catering to Abigail's every whim. Jackson may have been blunt, but he wasn't wrong. Abigail, sensing that she was losing control of the situation, burst into tears. It was a tactic I had seen her use countless times when confronted with unpleasant truths. You're all ganging up on me. It's not my fault if Mom and Dad gave me things. I didn't ask to be treated differently. You may not have asked initially, Jackson said, his tone softening slightly, but you've certainly learned to exploit it. That's not entirely your fault either. You were raised to believe you were entitled to preferential treatment. But at some point as an adult, you need to recognize the inequality and work to correct it, not perpetuate it. My mother stood abruptly. I think this dinner is over. I can't believe you would ruin our anniversary with this ambush. As the other guests began to shift uncomfortably, unsure whether to leave or stay, Jackson rose from his seat. I apologize for disrupting your celebration. That wasn't my intention. But sometimes the truth is disruptive, especially when it's been avoided for so long. He turned to Derek and me. I'll wait for you outside. As he walked toward the door, my father called after him. Don't expect to be welcome in our home again. You've destroyed this family with your meddling. Jackson paused, looking back over his shoulder. With all due respect, sir, this family was damaged long before I arrived on the scene. I just turned on the light so everyone could see it. With that, he left, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. The immediate aftermath of Jackson's confrontation was pure chaos. My mother collapsed into tears while my father attempted to salvage the evening, assuring the other guests that this was simply a family misunderstanding that had gotten out of hand. Most of the guests, sensing the gravity of what had transpired, made hasty excuses and departed, leaving just our immediate family in the private dining room. Derek and I sat in stunned silence, processing what had just happened. I felt simultaneously liberated and terrified, like someone who had jumped from a plane and wasn't sure if their parachute would open. My father, once the room had cleared of witnesses, turned his anger fully on me. I hope you're satisfied, he spat. Your brother-in-law has completely ruined what should have been a beautiful celebration of our marriage. That's what you're concerned about? I asked, finding a courage I hadn't known I possessed. Your party being disrupted, not the fact that everything he said was true. None of it was true, my mother sobbed. We've always loved you both equally. How could you let him say those horrible things about us? I didn't let him do anything, I replied. Jackson is his own person. But he wasn't wrong, Mom. You and Dad have always favored Abigail. Always. That's ridiculous, my father insisted. We've supported both of you in different ways. How? I challenged. How exactly have you supported me? You didn't help with my college tuition. You've never celebrated my accomplishments without immediately turning the conversation to Abigail. You've spent my entire adult life trying to get me to support her financially while never once offering to help me. My father's face reddened. We raised you, put a roof over your head, fed you, clothed you. That's what parents do. That's the bare minimum, Derek interjected. Parents are supposed to love their children equally, to support their dreams equally. You've never done that for Noreen. Abigail, who had been quietly crying in the corner, suddenly looked up. You're all acting like I'm some spoiled princess who's never done anything. I've worked hard too. It's not my fault if things have been difficult for me. Things have been difficult because you've never had to develop resilience. I told her the words I'd held back for years finally pouring out. Every time you've faced a challenge, Mom and Dad have rushed in to solve it for you. Every time you've failed, they've made excuses instead of helping you learn from the experience. So this is my fault now, Abigail demanded, her voice rising. You're jealous because Mom and Dad love me and you're trying to turn everyone against me. No one is turning against you. Derek said evenly. We're simply pointing out a pattern that's been harmful to everyone, including you. Being constantly rescued doesn't help you grow. My mother stood up shakily. I think we should all go home and calm down. We can discuss this when everyone is less emotional. That's your solution to everything, isn't it? I said bitterly. Avoid the difficult conversations, pretend everything is fine, and hope it all blows over so you can go back to the status quo. Noreen, that's enough, my father warned. You're upset and you're saying things you'll regret later. I'm not upset, Dad. I'm clear-headed for the first time in my life. And I'm done pretending that the way you've treated me is okay. Derek stood and extended his hand to me. I think we should go. This conversation isn't productive right now. I nodded, suddenly exhausted by the emotional intensity of the evening. As we gathered our things to leave, my father called after us. If you walk out that door, don't expect things to be the same between us. You've made your choice clear. I turned to face him one last time. You're right, Dad. I have made my choice. I'm choosing myself, probably for the first time in my life. We found Jackson waiting in the restaurant lobby, his expression concerned. I'm sorry if I overstepped, he said immediately. I just couldn't watch it anymore. Don't apologize, Derek told his brother, clapping him on the shoulder. Someone needed to say it, and apparently it needed to be you. The drive home was surreal. I felt as though I was floating outside my body, watching the events of the evening play out from a distance. Jackson sat in the back seat, uncharacteristically quiet. Are you okay? He asked, finally leaning forward between the front seats to look at me. I don't know, I admitted. I feel numb, like I'm in shock. That's understandable, he said gently. You just stood up to a lifetime of conditioning and emotional manipulation. It's going to take time to process. When we arrived home, Derek opened a bottle of wine while Jackson and I sat at the kitchen counter. As the initial numbness wore off, a complex mix of emotions washed over me: grief, relief, anger, and a strange sense of liberation, all mingling together. I can't believe that just happened, I said, taking a long sip of wine. I've never spoken to my parents that way before. You were amazing, Derek assured me, squeezing my shoulder. I've never been prouder of you. What happens now? I wondered aloud. Are they going to cut us off completely? Jackson considered this. They might try at first. People who are confronted with their own behavior often react defensively, but giving them some space might actually be the healthiest thing for everyone right now. The next few weeks proved Jackson right. My phone was flooded with texts and calls from my parents, and Abigail, ranging from angry accusations to tearful pleas to guilt-inducing reminders of all they had supposedly done for me. I read the texts, but didn't respond, needing time to sort through my own feelings before engaging with theirs. My mother left voicemails claiming I had broken her heart by turning against the family. My father's messages were more direct, demanding that I apologize to them and to Abigail for allowing Jackson to attack us. Abigail alternated between rage, claiming I had ruined her life by not supporting her master's degree, and self-pity, saying she had always known I was jealous of her. It was exhausting and painful, but also clarifying. Their responses only confirmed the dynamics Jackson had called out, each of them centered on their own feelings with no consideration for mine. Through it all, Jackson remained a steady support, checking in regularly and offering both emotional encouragement and practical advice on setting boundaries. When I expressed guilt about causing a rift in the family, he gently reminded me that I hadn't caused the dysfunction, I had merely stopped enabling it. Healthy relationships can withstand honest communication, he told me during one particularly difficult evening. If your relationship with your parents can't survive you speaking your truth, then it wasn't healthy to begin with. The first holiday without my family of origin was Thanksgiving. Derek's parents invited us to their home, creating a warm and inclusive celebration that highlighted everything my family gatherings had lacked. There was no walking on eggshells, no competition for attention, just genuine connection and mutual respect. As we were helping clean up after dinner, Derek's mother pulled me aside. I want you to know that we consider you our daughter, she said, her eyes warm with sincerity. Not a daughter-in-law, not an addition, but our daughter. You belong here, Noreen. Her words brought tears to my eyes. After a lifetime of trying to earn a place in my own family, I had found unconditional acceptance in Derek's. Then a few days before Christmas, I received an unexpected call from Abigail. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Noreen. Her voice sounded different, smaller somehow. Can we talk? I agreed to meet her for coffee, bracing myself for another confrontation. Jackson had offered to come with me for support, but I decided this was a conversation I needed to have alone. Abigail was waiting when I arrived, looking uncharacteristically subdued in a simple sweater and jeans, rather than her usual flashy attire. As I sat down across from her, I noticed dark circles under her eyes and a weariness I had never seen in my perpetually pampered sister. "Thanks for coming," she said, fidgeting with her coffee cup. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," I admitted. "The last few months haven't exactly been conducive to sisterly bonding." She nodded, looking down. "I know. That's actually why I wanted to talk to you. I've been doing a lot of thinking since the anniversary dinner." I waited, curious about where this was going. "At first I was just angry," she continued. "At you, at Derek, especially at Jackson. I thought you were all ganging up on me, trying to make me look bad. But then things started happening that made me see things differently." "What things?" I asked. "Mom and Dad have been fighting a lot. Dad's been saying they need to cut back financially because their retirement accounts are drained. Mom keeps blaming you for abandoning the family, but Dad finally admitted that they've spent way more on me over the years than they ever did on you." I felt a bittersweet vindication hearing this. I'm sorry they're fighting, but I'm not sorry the truth is finally being acknowledged. "There's more," Abigail said, looking uncomfortable. "I was rejected from the master's program. My undergraduate grades weren't good enough, and my work experience wasn't what they were looking for. When I told Mom and Dad, I expected them to pull strings or find a way around it like they always have. But Dad just said maybe it was for the best since they couldn't afford it anyway." "How did that make you feel?" I asked, genuinely curious about her reaction to this first real taste of consequences. She thought about it. "Honestly, terrified at first. I've never had to face that kind of rejection without them fixing it somehow. But after the initial shock, kind of relieved. Like maybe I didn't really want that degree anyway. I just wanted the validation of being accepted." It was the most self-aware thing I had ever heard her say. "I've been talking to Jackson," she added, surprising me. "He reached out a few weeks ago, which I thought was weird after everything that happened." "Jackson called you?" This was news to me. Abigail nodded. "He said he wanted to check how I was doing. At first I told him to go to hell, but he was really patient. He said he understood why I was angry, but thought maybe I could use someone to talk to who wasn't directly involved in the family dynamics." "And you agreed to that?" I was struggling to imagine my entitled sister accepting help from someone who had so publicly called out her behavior. "Not right away," she admitted with a small smile. But he was persistent. And he didn't judge me the way I expected. He just asked questions that made me think about things differently. "Like what?" "Like whether I'm happy with my life, whether I feel fulfilled, whether I like the person I've become." She looked up, her eyes filling with tears. "The answer to all of those questions is no, Noreen. I'm not happy. I don't have any real accomplishments that I earned myself. I don't have real friends who like me for me, rather than what I can get from my parents. I'm 26 years old, and I have nothing to show for it except a string of failures that everyone pretended weren't my fault." I was stunned by this level of self-reflection from my sister. That's a hard realization to come to." She wiped her eyes with a napkin. "Jackson helped me see that the way Mom and Dad treated me wasn't actually good for me. He said being the golden child might seem like a privilege, but it's actually a cage. They created this image of me as this perfect, special person, and I've spent my whole life trying to maintain that image while knowing deep down I couldn't live up to it." For the first time, I felt a genuine connection with my sister, seeing past the entitled behavior to the insecurity beneath. He also helped me understand what they did to you, she continued. How unfair it was, how much harder you had to work for everything. I never saw it before because it was just normal to me. I'm sorry, Noreen. I'm really sorry. The apology was so unexpected that for a moment I couldn't respond. Thank you, I said finally. That means a lot to hear. I want to change, she said, determination in her voice. I don't want to be this person anymore, always expecting things to be handed to me, always playing the victim. Jackson's been helping me look for jobs, teaching me how to budget. I'm even thinking about getting my own place, something I can actually afford. As we continued talking, I saw glimpses of a sister I had never known someone more thoughtful and self-aware than I had believed possible. The conversation wasn't a magical healing of all the wounds between us, but it was a start, a first tentative step toward a healthier relationship. When I got home and told Derek and Jackson about the meeting, Jackson smiled slightly. She's got a long way to go, but she's trying. That's something. You knew about this, Derek asked his brother. You've been counseling Abigail and didn't tell us. Jackson shrugged. It wasn't my place to share. She needed someone who could be objective, who wasn't directly hurt by her behavior. And honestly, I think she has potential if she can break free from the role your parents cast her in. I looked at Jackson with new appreciation. The man who had so fiercely confronted my parents about their favoritism was also extending compassion to the very sister who had benefited from it. It was a depth of understanding I was still working toward myself. As difficult as the confrontation had been, it had set in motion changes I never could have imagined. My own healing journey was just beginning, but for the first time I felt hopeful about the possibility of genuine growth, not just for myself, but for my entire family. 6 months after the confrontation at my parents' anniversary dinner, my life had transformed in ways both subtle and profound. The most noticeable change was in my own confidence and self-worth. Without the constant need to seek approval from parents who would never fully give it, I found myself standing taller, speaking more assertively, and making decisions based on what I truly wanted rather than what might earn love or validation. My career flourished as I channeled energy previously spent on family dynamics into professional growth. I secured a significant promotion, leading a team for the first time, and exceeding even my own expectations for what I could achieve. Derek beamed with pride at my success, but took no credit when I thanked him for his support. This is all you, Noreen, he insisted. You've always had this potential. You were just too busy trying to prove yourself to your parents to fully embrace it. I had been seeing a therapist since shortly after the confrontation, working through the complex layers of childhood trauma and unhealthy patterns. In those sessions, I grieved for the childhood I deserved, but never had the unconditional love that should have been my birthright. I confronted the anger I had suppressed for decades, allowing myself to finally feel and process it rather than burying it beneath a veneer of understanding and accommodation. The relationship with my parents remained strained but not completely severed. After 3 months of minimal contact, my father had reached out with a cautious invitation to meet for lunch, just the two of us. The conversation had been awkward with long silences and careful navigation around sensitive topics. He didn't offer a full apology for the years of favoritism, but he did acknowledge that perhaps we could have been more balanced in our approach to raising you girls. It was a small concession, far from the complete recognition I might have hoped for, but it was something. We agreed to proceed with caution, rebuilding our relationship step by step, without the expectations and patterns of the past. My mother had been less willing to acknowledge any wrongdoing. Our first conversation after the estrangement had devolved quickly into tears and accusations from her side, claims that I had broken the family by allowing Jackson to attack them publicly. I had calmly ended the call when it became clear she wasn't ready to have a productive conversation. In the months since we had established a tenuous peace, speaking occasionally with the understanding that certain topics were off limits. It wasn't the warm maternal relationship I had always craved, but it was honest in a way our previous interactions had never been. I no longer pretended her behavior wasn't hurtful, and she no longer pretended it wasn't happening. The most surprising development had been in my relationship with Abigail. After our coffee shop conversation, she had continued to meet regularly with Jackson, who had become an unlikely mentor to her. With his guidance, she had secured an entry-level position at a marketing firm, a job she had earned entirely on her own merits, rather than through parental connections. She had moved out of our parents' home into a modest apartment she shared with a roommate, learning to budget and live within her means for the first time in her life. The transition hadn't been easy. There had been tears and complaints and moments of wanting to give up. But each small success, each bill paid on time, each positive performance review at work had built a foundation of genuine confidence that no amount of parental coddling ever had. Our sisterly relationship was evolving slowly, with occasional setbacks when old patterns emerged. But we were talking more honestly than we ever had before, finding common ground in our shared experiences of a dysfunctional family system, albeit from very different perspectives. One evening in early summer, Derek and I hosted a dinner at our newly purchased home, a modest but comfortable house we had saved for diligently. Abigail arrived on time, bringing a bottle of wine she had carefully selected to match the meal, a small but meaningful gesture of consideration that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. Jackson joined us, his presence no longer carrying the tension it once had, but rather a sense of steady support for all of us. As we sat around the table enjoying the meal Derek and I had prepared together, Abigail suddenly set down her fork. "I want to say something," she announced, her voice uncharacteristically serious. "I've been thinking about this for a while, and I need to say it properly." We all turned to her, curious. "Noreen," she began, looking directly at me, "I am truly sorry for my role in how our family treated you. I knew on some level that things weren't fair, but it was easier to accept the favoritism than to question it. I took advantage of it, and I hurt you in the process." I felt a lump form in my throat, unprepared for the directness and sincerity of her apology. "I can't change the past," she continued, "but I want you to know that I see it clearly now. You deserved better from all of us, and I'm committed to being a better sister moving forward if you'll give me that chance." Derek reached under the table to squeeze my hand as I struggled to find words. "Thank you, Abigail," I managed finally. "That means more than you know. And yes, I'd like to try building a real relationship, one based on mutual respect and honesty." Jackson raised his glass. "To new beginnings." He toasted, a hint of pride in his eyes as he looked between Abigail and me. As we continued our meal, the conversation flowing more naturally than it ever had in our family of origin, I reflected on the strange path that had led us here. Jackson's confrontation, which had seemed so shocking and potentially destructive in the moment, had ultimately been the catalyst for healing that none of us could have anticipated. 2 weeks later, my parents reached out with a tentative invitation to Sunday dinner. It would be the first time all of us had been together since the fateful anniversary celebration. After careful consideration and discussion with Derek and my therapist, I accepted with clear boundaries about what behavior would and wouldn't be tolerated. The dinner was not without tension. My mother still struggled to give me the same attention she lavished on Abigail, though I noticed Abigail gently redirecting conversations when this happened, a small but significant shift in the family dynamic. My father made an effort to ask about my recent promotion, though he clearly didn't fully understand or appreciate the achievement. There were no dramatic apologies or complete transformations. My parents were who they were, shaped by their own histories and limitations. But there was a new honesty in our interactions, a refusal on my part to accept less than I deserved, and a growing recognition on theirs that the old patterns would no longer work. As we drove home afterward, Derek asked how I was feeling. "Peaceful," I replied after some thought. "Not because everything is perfect, but because I'm no longer expecting it to be. I'm not waiting for them to become different parents or to finally see my worth. My worth isn't dependent on their recognition of it anymore." In the rearview mirror of life, I could see now that family healing rarely happens in dramatic moments of perfect resolution. It happens in small steps, in boundaries maintained, in new patterns established over time. It happens when we find the courage to speak our truth, even when that truth disrupts the comfortable lie of family harmony. Jackson's confrontation had been the earthquake that shook our family to its foundations. But from those ruins, we were building something new, something imperfect, but more authentic than what had come before. The journey wasn't over. There would be setbacks and difficult conversations ahead, but for the first time, we were walking the path with open eyes and honest hearts. Family is indeed about who loves and supports you, but sometimes that family is one you find rather than one you're born into. In Derek and Jackson, in Derek's parents, I had found the unconditional acceptance I had spent a lifetime seeking from my parents. That knowledge gave me the strength to approach my family of origin, not from a place of desperate need, but from a place of secure wholeness. As I reflect on this journey, I wonder how many of you have experienced similar family dynamics. Have you ever had to set boundaries with loved ones who couldn't see your worth? Have you found the courage to speak your truth even when it was uncomfortable? Share your stories in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe if this resonated with you. Your experiences might help someone else find the strength to stand up for themselves. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that healing is rarely linear, but always worth pursuing.